Imagine you're walking down a small suburban street. It's getting dark, and the chill of late afternoon is settling in. The streetlights are flickering, and somewhere in the distance, you hear a police siren. On the corner, there's a black man who looks like an ordinary vagrant. His clothes are old, his jacket is torn at the sleeves, and his shoes are covered in mud. He's standing there, clutching a crumpled plastic bag, his eyes on the ground as if trying to avoid anyone's gaze. But then a patrol car passes by, slows down, and stops right in front of him. Two policemen step out, one tall with short blonde hair, the other smaller, but his eyes are as sharp as knives. They looked him up and down, and you could see the way they smirked at each other, the kind of smirk that everyone recognized, as if they'd found a diversion for a boring evening. "Hey, you," the tall cop said, his tone full of mockery. "You look like you just crawled out of a sewer. Where are you sneaking around?" The man looked up, but said nothing, just shook his head. His eyes were calm, but there was something about them that made you feel he wasn't quite as helpless as he looked. The two cops didn't stop, though. They began circling him like vultures. "I bet he's hiding something," the smaller cop said, his hand on his gun holster, as if ready to spring into action. "Check it out. It's probably some homeless guy causing trouble." They asked him to reach out, searched his pockets, and when the plastic bag fell to the ground, a few old cans rolled out. The tall cop laughed even louder. "Look, a real trash collector. What do you do with these? Sell them for a few bucks to buy alcohol?" Their laughter rang out in the air, and a few passers-by nearby started to look back. An old woman standing not far away shook her head, but no one spoke. No one dared. The man remained silent, but you could see his hands clenching slightly. Not the kind of fists of someone about to fight, but the kind of fists of someone holding back something bigger. The tall cop stepped closer, so close that you could see his breath in the cold air. "Say something, or are you mute? You don't have any identification, do you? I bet you don't even have a right to be here." His tone had turned blatantly rude now, and the other cop began writing something down on his notebook, as if they had decided the man's fate on the spot. The tension grew as the tall cop tugged on his arm, pulling him toward the patrol car. "Come on, don't waste our time. You'll be sleeping in a cell tonight, cleaner than your filthy corner." The man swayed a little, but didn't protest. He let them lead him away, but there was something about the way he walked that struck you as odd. He didn't bow his head, didn't cower like a scared man. He walked with a calmness you couldn't explain. And then, as they pushed him into the back of the car, the smaller cop said loudly enough for the whole street to hear, "You're a disgrace to the city. Be smart and shut up." You stood there, anger beginning to rise in your chest. Why didn't anyone do anything? How could they treat a man like that just because of his appearance? But then, as the car door was about to close, the man raised his head and looked straight at the two policemen. His eyes were no longer calm. They were sharp, like an invisible blade. And in that moment, you realized something was about to happen. He smiled slightly, a small but meaningful smile, as if he knew something that no one else on the street knew. The tall policeman frowned. "What are you laughing at? Think you can get away with it?" But the man didn't answer. He just reached into his inside pocket, slowly, almost deliberately. And you wondered, what is he doing? What is going to happen to this man? The patrol car was still there, its red and blue lights illuminating the corner. Two officers stood outside, one leaning against the car door, a notebook in his hand, the other with his arms folded, looking contemptuously at the man through the window. "Let's get him over with," the tall officer said, speaking as if he had done this 100 times before. "Take him to the station, write him a few notes, and then send him away." This kind of guy isn't worth wasting time on. But inside the car, the man was no longer silent. He sat up straight, his hands still in his inside pockets. And then, in a slow but confident motion, he pulled out something small and shiny under the streetlights. The officers didn't notice right away. They were still laughing and joking until the man tapped lightly on the window. "Hey," he said, his voice low but clear, speaking for the first time since it all began. "Are you sure you want to do this?" The smaller cop turned, frowning. "What are you talking about? Wanting to cause trouble?" But then he saw what the man held, a metal badge, gleaming with clear inscriptions. FBI. Time seemed to stand still in that moment. The tall cop leaned back, mouth agape, while the other stood frozen, his hand holding the notepad shaking. "What did you just call me?" The man continued, his voice now cold, sharp as a knife cutting through the air. "A scavenger? A city slicker?" He opened the car door, stepped out before they could react, and held the badge high so they could both see. "Agent James Carter, Federal Bureau of Investigation. I was doing my job and you just ruined it." The small crowd gathered nearby began to murmur. The old woman's eyes widened, and a man standing near the patrol car backed away, as if in disbelief. The two cops paled. The big one stammered, We didn't know you looked like." But James cut him off immediately. "Like what? Like someone who doesn't belong here? Like someone you can bully without thinking?" He stepped closer, his eyes locked on them, and you could see sweat starting to roll down the smaller cop's forehead. "I've been following a crime ring for 3 months, disguised so no one would suspect anything. And you, with that attitude, just gave me away." His voice wasn't loud, but each word felt like a punch. The big cop tried to justify himself. "We were just doing our job, sir. We didn't mean to." But James didn't let him finish. He pulled out his phone, dialed a number, and within seconds, the voice on the other end of the line came through the speaker clearly. "Agent Carter, what's going on?" James looked straight at the two officers. "I need the surveillance team here immediately. And by the way, report these two officers to their commanders. I have full proof on my chest cam." He pointed to a small button on his jacket, a hidden camera that no one had noticed. The atmosphere changed completely. The smaller officer almost collapsed, and the other stepped back, his hands shaking. "Sir, I'm sorry. We didn't know." They began to stammer an apology, but James just shook his head. "You're not apologizing to me," he said, his voice hard. "You're apologizing to everyone you've ever treated like this before, just because of the color of their skin or the way they look. But don't worry, you'll have your chance to explain, in front of your superiors." He turned back to the crowd, his eyes scanning each person. "Who here thinks this is normal?" he asked, his voice full of challenge. No one dared to answer. Then he looked back at the two policemen. "You think you can do whatever you want, right? But today, you picked the wrong guy." He walked over, picked up the plastic bag, and placed it in the tall policeman's hands. "Keep it. It's the evidence I collected. Now take me to the station, but this time, I'll be the one calling the shots." The patrol car rolled silently, but the atmosphere inside was as heavy as a stone pressing on his chest. James sat in the back seat, holding the FBI badge in his hand, his eyes coldly looking out of the window. The two policemen did not dare to say anything more. The tall one driving the car, his hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly that his knuckles turned white, while the other bowed his head, his notebook falling to the floor without him noticing. When they arrived at the police station, the news had already spread like wildfire. A group of officers stood outside the door, their eyes filled with curiosity and worry. Someone had called the commander, and he was waiting in the office. James walked in without hesitation, The two policemen trailed behind, looking like two children who had just been caught doing something wrong. The commander, a middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, looked at James and nodded. "Agent Carter, I have been informed. What happened?" James placed the plastic bag on the table, his voice calm but full of authority. "Here's the evidence I've been collecting for the past 3 months. Information on a cross-state smuggling ring. I went undercover to get close to them, and these two officers just blew it by arresting me for no reason." The commander turned to the two officers, his eyes piercing. "Do you have anything to say?" The tall officer stammered, "Sir, we don't know. He looks like—" But the commander cut him off immediately. "What does he look like? Like someone you can bully without checking? Do you know you just endangered a federal mission?" His voice boomed like thunder, and the room fell silent. James stood there, saying nothing more, but his presence was enough to make the two officers tremble. Within hours, everything was resolved. The two officers were immediately suspended, pending an internal investigation. James's body cam recorded the entire incident, from the laughter to the insults, and the footage was sent straight to higher-ups. But the story didn't end there. The next morning, a story appeared online. Headlined, "Cops Arrest Undercover FBI Agents, a Consequence of Prejudice." The names of the two officers were made public, and the community began to speak out. They not only lost their jobs, but their reputations. A neighbor of the tall cop said he didn't dare leave his house for a week because of the scrutiny he received. Meanwhile, James returned to work, but this time he was no longer an anonymous person. People who had seen the incident on the street began to tell their stories, and he became a symbol of resilience. One evening, as he sat in the FBI office, a colleague walked in and placed a cup of coffee on the table. "You know, James," he said, "that day you didn't just save the mission, you taught the world a lesson." James smiled, for the first time since that day. "I didn't do it to teach anyone," he said. "I did it because it was the right thing to do." James's story spread far and wide, and it made you think. What would have happened if he hadn't had that badge? What would happen to those who never got a chance to prove their worth? Those two cops, they hadn't just made the mistake once. They'd made the mistake 100 times before, to people who couldn't fight back. But this time, they'd run into someone who wouldn't let them be. Justice isn't always quick, but when it comes, it doesn't spare anyone. James stood up, not with his fists, but with the truth, and that truth is stronger than anything. Have you ever wondered how quickly we judge people based on their appearance? We laugh, we scorn, but we never know who is standing in front of us. James Carter is proof that justice need not be loud. It just needs to be timely. And when it comes, the arrogant will kneel, not out of fear, but because they have no choice. That day, on that small street, a black man who was considered trash made the world look back. And you, what do you think of that?